Princess Valith Catharan stood at the window of her private chambers and watched the sun set over the golden spires of Solaris Prime. She was 28 years old by the Solari calendar, and she had never felt so trapped in her entire life. The peace treaty had been signed 3 months ago, and with it came the requirement that had changed everything about her future. A marriage not to a Solari warrior or a noble from one of the allied systems, but to a human from the Terran Federation. The humans had only made contact with the greater galactic community 50 years ago, and they were still considered newcomers by most species. They were small and fragile, and their lifespans were laughably short compared to the Solari who lived for nearly 1,000 years. But the humans had ships, and they had numbers, and most importantly, they had positioned themselves between the Maisgi, Solari Dominion, and the Vorn hegemony. The Vorn were coming, and everyone knew it. They'd already consumed 3 minor civilizations in the past decade, and their hunger showed no signs of stopping. The Solari needed allies, and the humans had offered their hand. The price was simple, a royal marriage to cement the alliance. Valith had accepted her duty with the dignity expected of her bloodline, but she had hoped that the humans would at least send someone impressive. They did not. Marcus Cole arrived on a transport shuttle with a single bag of belongings and a smile that seemed far too casual. For someone about to marry a princess, he was 6 feet tall, which was average for a human, but practically small by Solari standards. Valith stood at 8 feet like most of her kind, and she had to look down to meet his eyes. Those eyes were brown and warm, and they crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He smiled a lot too much, in her opinion. Princess Valith, he had said during their first meeting with a bow that was slightly wrong but clearly practiced. I am honored to meet you, and I hope we can build something good together. Build something good together. Not forge an unbreakable alliance or unite our peoples in strength, but build something good together. Like they were constructing a garden shed. Her handmaiden Thessaly had pulled her aside after that first meeting with barely concealed horror on her face. He is a bureaucrat, my lady, Thessaly whispered. I reviewed his file myself, and there was nothing remarkable about him at all. Valith had reviewed the file. 2 Marcus Cole had been born on a farming colony called New Wisconsin, which was apparently named after a region on the human homeworld. His parents had been agricultural engineers, and he had followed in their footsteps until he joined the Terran Diplomatic Corps at age 30. He had spent the next 15 years as a minor attach assigned to various postings around Federation space. No military service, no combat training, no notable achievements or commendations. The humans had sent her a clerk. For the first few months of their marriage, Valith maintained a polite distance from her new husband. She attended to her duties as a princess of the realm, and he attended to whatever it was that clerks did. She assumed it involved paperwork. But Marcus proved difficult to ignore. He was everywhere in the palace, asking questions about everything. He wanted to know about Solari history and culture and art. He spent hours in the royal library, reading texts that had not been touched in centuries. He learned her language with surprising speed, though his accent remained terrible and his formal conjugations were always slightly wrong. Most annoyingly, he took an intense interest in her private garden. The garden was Valith's sanctuary, and she had cultivated it since childhood with rare plants from across the Dominion. No one else was allowed inside. But Marcus had somehow learned about it, and he asked her questions about the plants with such genuine curiosity that she found herself answering despite her better judgment. This one glows at night, she told him one evening, pointing to a spiral-shaped flower with blue petals. It absorbs sunlight during the day and releases it slowly after dark. That is beautiful, Marcus said, and his voice held real wonder. On my colony, we had these flowers called fireflies that would bloom in the summer and attract insects that also glowed, and the whole field would light up like stars had fallen to the ground. He paused, and his smile flickered for just a moment. I miss that sometimes. It was the first time. Valith had seen anything other than pleasant contentment on his face. She found herself wanting to ask more, but he changed the subject to the soil composition of her garden beds, and the moment passed. The years went by, and Vela's feelings toward her husband shifted in ways she had not expected. She did not love him exactly, but she had grown fond of him in the way one might grow fond of a gentle pet. He was kind, and he was patient, and he never seemed bothered by the way the Solari court treated him. The warriors mocked him openly, and the nobles whispered behind his back, and her own siblings looked at him with something between pity and contempt. Marcus responded to all of it with the same easy smile and an offer to show them card tricks. The card tricks were admittedly impressive. He could make cards appear and disappear and dance between his fingers in ways that delighted her youngest siblings, even as the adults rolled their eyes. "He is trying so hard," her mother said one day with a sigh. "It is almost sad." Valeth wanted to defend him, but she was not sure what she would say. He was trying hard, and it was a little sad. Sometimes, late at night, when she could not sleep, Valeth would find Marcus in one of the palace workshops. He had taken to repairing things that the servants had discarded, and his quarters were filled with machines and devices he had brought back to life. "You do not have to do that," she told him once. "We have servants for repairs." "I like fixing things," he said, without looking up from the broken music box in his hands. "There is something satisfying about taking something that does not work and making it work again." "Is that why you agreed to this marriage?" she asked. "To fix something?" Marcus looked up at her then, and for just a moment she saw something flicker in those warm brown eyes, something old, something tired. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I just wanted to see the stars from somewhere new." He returned to his work, and Valeth returned to her chambers, and she told herself that she did not feel guilty about the way she had dismissed him in her heart. He was just a clerk after all, just an ordinary man. She had no idea how wrong she was. The Festival of Seven Suns was the most sacred celebration in the Solari calendar. It marked the anniversary of the day their ancestors had first harnessed the power of their star, and it brought together the entire royal family along with nobles and dignitaries from across the Dominion. The Golden Court was filled with thousands of guests dressed in their finest ceremonial robes. Music echoed through the vaulted halls, and the air smelled of incense and exotic flowers. Valeth stood beside her father, the emperor, as he addressed the gathered crowd with words about unity and strength and the bright future that awaited their people. She had heard this speech 100 times before, and her mind wandered to other things. She wondered where Marcus was. He had said something about checking on a repair in the East Wing, and she had not seen him since the festivities began. She hoped he was not getting lost again. The palace was large, and he still had trouble navigating the older sections. First explosion came without warning. The great dome above the throne room shattered inward, and glass rained down on the screaming crowd like glittering knives. Valeth moved on instinct, and she threw herself in front of her younger siblings as debris crashed around them. Through the broken dome she could see ships descending through clouds of smoke and firevern dropships, dozens of them. "The shields," her father shouted. How did they breach the shields? No one had an answer. The planetary defense GRID, the protected Solaris Prime, was supposed to be impenetrable, and it had held against every attack for 300 years. But the Vorn were pouring through like the shields did not exist. At Valeth grabbed her ceremonial blade from its sheath at her hip, and she was grateful that tradition demanded royalty carry weapons even to peaceful celebrations. "Protect the children," she ordered thusly. "Get them to the safe room. My lady, you must come too. I am a warrior of the blood." Valeth said, "I will not hide while my people die." She charged into the chaos. The Vorn were already inside the palace, and they moved through the halls like a plague of armored insects. Each one stood 7 feet tall with 4 arms, ending in razor-sharp claws, and their exoskeletons were thick enough to stop most energy weapons. But Valeth's blade was not an energy weapon. It was crystalline steel forged in the heart of a dying star, and it cut through Vorn carapace like paper. She killed 3 of them before they even knew she was there, and she killed 2 more as they turned to face her. Their blood was black and it steamed where it hit the marble floors. The princess fights. One of them gurgled through its translation membrane. "Take her alive and the Collector will reward us." The Collector Valith knew that name, Skithrix. The Collector was a Vorn war commander who had conquered 11 worlds in the past century, and he was infamous for one thing above all else. He collected royal bloodlines, kept them as slaves, and bred them like animals, and displayed them as trophies of his victories. Death would be preferable to falling into his hands. Valith fought harder. She carved a path through the palace toward the throne room where she had last seen her father, and she tried not to look at the bodies of guards and servants and guests that littered the halls. So many dead, so many dying. When she reached the throne room, the doors had been torn from their hinges, and the scene inside made her heart stop. Her father lay in a pool of golden blood at the base of his throne, with his crown crushed beside him. Mother knelt nearby, clutching a wound in her side that was clearly fatal, and her siblings, all 5 of them, stood in the center of the room, surrounded by Vorn warriors with weapons pointed at their heads. At the center of it all stood a monster, Skithrix. The Collector was enormous, even by Vorn standards, and he towered at nearly 10 feet tall with 6 arms instead of the standard. For his carapace was decorated with the symbols of every royal house he had conquered, and they covered him like a grotesque tapestry. "Ah," he said as Valith entered the room. "The last piece of my collection arrives." "Let them go," Valith said, and she raised her blade even though she knew she was outnumbered. "Such spirit," Skithrix gurgled. "I will enjoy breaking you over the coming centuries, and your children will serve my children, and their children will serve mine, and so on until your bloodline forgets it was ever anything but property." Valith's mother made a sound that might have been a sob. "Kill me if you want," Valith said, "but let my siblings go, and they are children." "Children grow," Skithrix said, "and royal children grow into royal adults who might one day seek revenge, and I find it better to train them young." He gestured to his warriors. "Restrain her, but do not damage her too badly, and I want her able to watch what comes next." Valith prepared to die fighting. She would not let them take her alive, no matter what, but before the Vorn could advance, she heard footsteps behind her, soft footsteps, human footsteps. "Excuse me." Valith turned and saw Marcus standing in the doorway. He was still wearing his soft house clothes, and he had a cup of tea in one hand. His hair was slightly messy, like he had been napping. "I heard some noise," he said. "Is everything all right?" For a moment, no one moved. Then Skithrix began to laugh. It was a wet, horrible sound like meat being torn apart. "The human pet," the war commander said. "I had heard the princess married one of the soft ones, and I did not believe anyone could be so desperate." Marcus looked around the room slowly. He looked at the bodies of the emperor and empress. He looked at the children surrounded by warriors. He looked at the blood and the destruction and the monster standing in the center of it all. And something in his face changed. The warmth drained out of his eyes like water through sand. The easy smile disappeared. What was left was nothing, absolutely nothing. "Let them go," Marcus said, and his voice was flat and quiet. "And I will make this quick." Skithrix stopped laughing. "What did you say?" "You heard me." The war commander stared at the small human for a long moment, and then his mandibles clicked in amusement. "Kill him," he ordered, "slowly, and let the princess watch her pet die before I take her." 4 Vorn warriors moved toward Marcus. They were each twice his size and armed with weapons that could cut through starship hulls. Marcus took a sip of his tea. Then he set the cup down very carefully on a nearby pedestal. "I warned you," he said, and then he moved. Valith had trained in combat since she could walk. She had studied under the greatest warriors in the Dominion, and she had sparred against opponents from a dozen different species. She thought she understood what fighting looked like. She was wrong. Marcus did not fight like anything she had ever seen. He did not fight like a Solari with their elegant blade forms and precise footwork. He did not fight like a Vorm with their brutal, overwhelming force. He did not even fight like the human she had seen in training videos with their scrappy determination and creative tactics. Marcus fought like something that had forgotten what mercy meant. The first Vorn warrior reached him and swung a massive blade toward his head. Marcus stepped inside. The arc of the swing and his hand shot forward and punched through the warrior's chest armor like it was made of wet paper. His fingers closed around something vital and he pulled. The Vorn collapsed. The whole thing took less than a second. The second and third warriors attacked together from both sides. Marcus caught the blade of one and redirected it into the throat of the other while simultaneously driving his elbow backward into the first warrior's face. Carapace shattered like glass, and black blood sprayed across the marble floor. The third warrior tried to grab him from behind, but Marcus was no longer there. He had moved without seeming to move at all, and he was suddenly behind the creature with his hands on either side of its head. He twisted. The sound was something Valeth would never forget. The fourth warrior turned and ran. It got 3 steps before Marcus appeared behind it and drove his palm into the base of its skull with a crack that echoed through the throne room. All 4 Vorn were dead. It had taken 4 seconds. Valeth stood frozen with her blade still raised and her mind unable to process what she had just witnessed. This was Marcus, her husband, the man who lost at board games to her youngest siblings, the man who spent his evenings fixing broken music boxes, the man who smiled too much and asked too many questions about flowers. That man was gone. The thing standing in his place was something else entirely. What? Skethrix's voice came out as a whisper. What are you? Marcus rolled his shoulders and Valeth heard his joints crack and pop like his body was remembering a shape it had kept hidden for years. The Terran Federation has a tradition, Marcus said as he walked toward the war commander. When we make alliances with other species, we do not send ambassadors. He stepped over the body of a fallen Vorn without looking down. We do not send soldiers. Another step. We send custodians. Skethrix raised all 6 of his arms and weapons, activated across his body with energy blades and projectile launchers and things Valeth did not recognize. I have conquered 11 worlds, the war commander said, and his voice was no longer confident. I have killed millions, and I have broken empires. I know, Marcus said. I read your file. You are one human. Yes. You cannot defeat me. Marcus stopped walking. He was still 10 feet away from Skethrix, and the war commander had enough weapons pointed at him to destroy a small building. 3 years ago, Marcus said, your forces attacked a human colony called New Horizon, and you killed 40,000 people, including 200 children, at a school called Riverside Elementary. Skethrix clicked his mandibles. I remember that. World, and they screamed beautifully. I am sure they did, Marcus said. But you missed one. What? A maintenance worker? And he was in the basement when your soldiers swept the building, and he hid under the bodies of children for 3 days. Until rescue arrived. Marcus tilted his head slightly. That maintenance worker asked me to deliver a message. And what message is that? Marcus smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not the easy, gentle smile that Valeth had seen every day for 3 years. It was the smile of something that had crawled out of the dark spaces between stars. He wanted me to tell you that humanity remembers, Marcus said, and humanity repays. Then he moved again. Skethrix was faster than his warriors had been, and he was smarter, and he fought with the experience of 1,000 battles. It did not matter. Marcus dismantled him. He broke the war commander's weapons one by one. He shattered his armor piece by piece. He took him apart with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Through it all, Skethrix screamed and cursed and threatened. He promised revenge. He promised that the hegemony would destroy humanity for this insult. He promised suffering beyond imagination. Marcus did not respond. He just kept working. When it was over, Skethrix lay on the floor of the throne room in a spreading pool of his own blood. He was still alive, but only barely. Marcus had been very careful about what parts of him still functioned. "You will live long enough to send a message to your masters," Marcus said as he stood over the broken monster. "Tell them what happened here, and tell them what you saw." He leaned down until his face was inches from Skethrix's ruined mandibles. "Tell them the custodians are awake." Valeth finally found her voice. "Marcus." He turned to look at her, and for a moment she saw only the abyss, the nothing, the absolute emptiness where a person should be. Then something flickered, and warmth crept back into his eyes. Just a little, just enough. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was soft again. "No." "Good." He looked at her siblings, who were still standing frozen in the center of the room, surrounded by the bodies of their captors. "I need to secure the palace," he said. "There are more of them in the East Wing, and I should deal with that before reinforcements arrive." "Reinforcements. Human reinforcements," he said. "I triggered a beacon when the attack started, and they've been waiting in the asteroid belt for 3 years, just in case." He paused. "I should have told you about that." Valeth stared at him. "You should have told me about a lot of things." "Yes," he agreed. "I should have." Then he walked out of the throne room, and Valeth heard the sounds of violence begin again somewhere in the distance. She stood there among the bodies and the blood and tried to understand what had just happened. Her husband was not a clerk. He had never been a clerk. And she had spent 3 years sleeping next to something that could kill monsters with its bare hands. She was not sure how she felt about that, but she was alive. Her siblings were alive, and somewhere in the palace the man she had married was keeping them that way. That would have to be enough for now. The battle for Solaris Prime lasted 6 hours. By the end of the first hour, human warships had arrived in orbit, and they were unlike anything the Solari had seen before. They were not elegant or beautiful like Solari vessels. They were brutal and efficient, and covered in weapons that tore through Vorn ships like they were made of paper. By the end of the third hour, the Vorn ground forces had been pushed back to their landing zones. Human soldiers in heavy armor fought alongside the surviving Solari warriors, and they moved with a coordination that suggested years of training together, even though the alliance was only 3 years old. By the end of the 6th hour, it was over. The Vorn fleet retreated into faster than light, and the surviving ground forces surrendered or died. Solaris Prime was saved, but the cost had been enormous. The Emperor was dead. The Empress had died from her wounds despite everything the healers tried. Half the royal court had been killed in the initial attack, along with thousands of civilians and soldiers. Valeth was now the ruler of the Solari Dominion. She sat in a makeshift command center that had been set up in one of the few undamaged wings of the palace, and she tried to process everything that had happened to her. World had changed in a single day. Everything she thought she knew had been proven wrong, and at the center of it all was her husband. Marcus stood on the other side of the room, speaking quietly with a human woman in a uniform that bore no insignia. The woman had arrived on one of the first ships, and she had asked for Marcus by name. They spoke in low voices, and their conversation looked serious. When they finished, the woman saluted Marcus, saluted him like he was her superior officer. Then she left, and Marcus walked over to where Valeth was sitting. "We should talk," he said. "Yes," Valeth agreed. "We should." They found a private room away from the chaos of the command center, and Marcus closed the door behind them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Your file said you were an agricultural engineer," Valeth finally said. "It said you grew up on a farming colony and joined the diplomatic corps at age 30 and had an unremarkable career pushing papers." "Most of that was true," Marcus said. "Which parts?" He sat down across from her, and she noticed that he moved differently now. Before, He had always seemed slightly awkward and uncertain in his body, like he did not quite fit in his own skin now. He moved like water, like smoke, like something that could flow through any gap and fill any space. "I was born on a farming colony," he said. "New Wisconsin, and my parents were agricultural engineers, and I grew up helping them tend the fields. And then the crick swarm came. Valith knew about the cricks. They were a hive mind species that consumed everything in their path, and they had been a threat to the outer colonies for decades. I was 17, Marcus continued. The swarm hit our world without warning, and there was no time to evacuate and no military forces close enough to help, and we were just farmers." His voice was flat and distant, like he was reading from a report about someone else's life. "My family died in the first wave, and so did most of our neighbors, and I watched my little sister get torn apart by swarm soldiers while I hid in a storage closet because I was too scared to move." "Marcus, I spent 2 weeks in the tunnels under my school," he continued. "At first I was just hiding and waiting for rescue. But rescue did not come, and eventually I ran out of food and I had to go looking." He looked down at his hands. "The swarm had soldiers patrolling everywhere, and I learned how to avoid them, and then I learned how to kill them, and by the time the Federation found me, I had killed over 200 of them with nothing but tools I'd found in the maintenance closets." Valith tried to imagine Ida, 17-year-old boy alone in the dark, killing alien monsters with improvised weapons, surrounded by the bodies of everyone he had ever known. "The Federation has a program," Marcus said. "They look for survivors of attacks like that, and they look for people who displayed certain abilities during extreme trauma, and they call it removal. Removal. The ability to set aside everything that makes you human, and fear and hesitation and mercy and pain and doubt, and to become something else entirely, and something that can do whatever needs to be done without flinching." He met her eyes. "Most people cannot do it, and their minds break before they reach that point. But some of us are already broken in just the right way. The custodians. Yes, and we spent 15 years training us, and they taught us how to fight, and how to kill, and how to survive anything. But they also taught us how to be human again, and how to smile, and how to love, and how to be gentle." He leaned back in his chair. "Being ordinary is harder than being a monster, and it takes practice and discipline and constant effort, but we learn because that is what we were meant to do." "What do you mean?" "The custodians are not soldiers," Marcus said. "Soldiers are obvious, and they draw attention, and they can be identified and neutralized, but we are something else." He gestured at himself. "We are farmers and teachers and clerks and engineers, and we are the people that no one looks at twice, and we embed ourselves in allied societies, and we watch and we wait. For what? For this," he said. "For the moment when someone threatens the people we have been sent to protect, and then we stop being ordinary." Valith thought about all the human civilians she had seen around the palace over the past 3 years. The friendly merchant who sold spices in the market district, the quiet teacher who had tutored her youngest siblings in mathematics, the maintenance worker who always seemed to be fixing things in the background. "How many?" she asked. "On this world in 47, and we have been here since the alliance was signed, and we have been mapping the palace and the city and the defense grid, and we have been preparing for exactly this scenario. You knew this would happen. We suspected, and the Void do not make alliances, and they consume. And the only question was when they would come and not if." Marcus leaned forward. "Every custodian on this world activated the moment the shields went down, and while I was dealing with Skethrix, they were securing evacuation routes and protecting key infrastructure and coordinating with the incoming fleet. The woman you were talking to, Commander Chun, and she is my handler, and she coordinates all custodian operations in this sector." Valith stood up and walked to the window. The city below was burning in places, and rescue crews were still pulling survivors from the rubble. "You lied to me," she said. I did. For 3 years you pretended to be someone you are not. I pretended to be ordinary, Marcus said. But I never pretended about the things that mattered. She turned to face him. What things? He stood up and walked toward her, and his movements were careful and slow, like he was approaching a frightened animal. I pretended to lose at board games because your siblings enjoyed winning, and I pretended to struggle with your language because people open up to those they think are harmless, and I pretended not to notice when your court mocked me because responding would have drawn attention. He stopped in front of her. But I never pretended to love your garden, and I never pretended to be fascinated by your history and your art and your culture, and I never pretended when I told you that your laugh sounds like morning bells. Valeth looked into his eyes. They were warm. Again, but she could see the abyss lurking beneath. The nothing he had become when he killed those warriors. Can you turn it off? She asked. I can push it down, he said. I can cover it up with smiles and kindness and gentle words, and I can be the man who makes you tea in the morning and fixes broken music boxes. He reached out and took her hand. But it never goes away, and it is always there and waiting and ready, and if you cannot live with that, I will understand. Valeth thought about her father lying dead in the throne room. She thought about her mother bleeding out while monsters surrounded her children. She thought about what would have happened if Marcus had been exactly what he pretended to be. Just a clerk. Just an ordinary man. I can live with it, she said, and she meant it. 6 months had passed since the attack on Solaris Prime. Valeth stood on the balcony of the rebuilt palace and watched the twin moons rise over the horizon. The reconstruction was nearly complete, and the scars of the Vorn invasion were slowly fading from the city below, but some scars would never heal. She was Empress now. The weight of that title pressed down on her every day, and she felt the eyes of her people looking to her for guidance and strength and hope. She tried to give them what they needed. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of footsteps and the gentle clink of ceramic. I brought tea, Marcus said. She turned and saw her husband standing in the doorway with 2 cups in his hands and a smile on his face. He was wearing his soft house clothes again. He looked ordinary. He looked like the man she had dismissed for 3 years as nothing more than a diplomatic inconvenience. But she knew better now. She knew what lived behind those warm brown eyes. Thank you, she said as she took one of the cups. They stood together on the balcony and watched the moons climb higher. The intelligence reports came in, Marcus said. The Vorn hegemony is pulling back from the border sectors, and they are fortifying their core worlds instead of expanding. Skethrix's message. It seems to have made an impression. The broken war commander had been sent back to his masters in a medical pod with just enough life support to keep him breathing. He had delivered his message. He had told them about the custodians. He had told them what humans really were. And for the first time in 100 years, the Vorn were afraid. The other species are asking questions, Valeth said. They want to know how many custodians are hidden in their territories, and they want to know if they should be worried. What did you tell them? I told them that the custodians only activate in defense of their allies, and I told them that humanity is not their enemy. She took a sip of her tea. I also told them that they should be very careful about becoming humanity's enemy. Marcus nodded. That seems fair. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. The wind carried the sounds of the city up to them, and she could hear music and laughter and the normal sounds of life continuing despite everything that had happened. I have been reading about human history, Valeth said eventually. Oh, you are a very strange species, Marcus smiled. I have heard that before. You nearly destroyed yourselves a dozen times before. You even reached the stars, and you fought wars over territory and resources and ideas, and you created weapons that could have ended all life on your world. We did. And yet you survived, and you not only survived, but you learned and you grew and you became something different. She turned to face him. The other species in the galaxy. And they evolved in relative peace, and they developed civilization without the constant pressure of existential conflict, and they became what they are through gradual progress. She set down her tea on the balcony railing. But humans and you were forged in fire, and you learn to be both gentle and terrible. And you learn to smile while the monster sleeps beneath your skin. Marcus looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Is that a criticism? No, she said. It is an observation. She moved closer to him, and she reached up to touch his face. He was so small compared to her, so fragile looking, but she knew now that the fragility was an illusion. My people have lived for 1,000 years without truly understanding war, she said. We had conflicts and we had battles, but we never faced extinction, and we never had to become something other than ourselves to survive. That is not a weakness. Perhaps not, but it meant we did not understand what we were dealing with when the Vorn came, and we thought our shields and our warriors and our technology would protect us, and we were wrong. She dropped her hand. You humans, and you understood, and you have always understood because you have been fighting for survival since the first of your ancestors picked up a rock and decided not to die. Valeth, I used to pity you, she said. When we first married, I thought you were a victim of politics and a small soft man sent to be a symbol of an alliance he did not understand. She smiled, and it was not a kind smile, but it was an honest one. I was an arrogant fool. You were not foolish, and you simply did not have all the information. I had 3 years to gather information, and I never looked closely because I assumed there was nothing to see. She walked to the edge of the balcony and looked out over her city. What does the Federation want? She asked. The real Federation and not the mask it wears for the galaxy. Marcus came to stand beside her. We want to survive, he said. That is all we have ever wanted. And the custodians. We are insurance, and we are the promise that humanity keeps its word. And when we make an alliance, we do not abandon our allies. And when we say we will protect someone, we mean it, even if it means dying. Especially then. He put his hand on the railing next to hers. I was prepared to die in that throne room, he said. If that is what it took to save your family, I would have done it without hesitation, and that is not because of duty or orders or training. He turned to look at her. It is because somewhere in the past 3 years the mission stopped mattering, and you started mattering instead. Valeth felt something shift in her chest, something warm and unexpected. You love me, she said. Yes, the real me, and not just the princess you were assigned to protect. The real you, and the woman who tends her garden at midnight and who laughs at terrible jokes and who pretends to be stern, but sneaks sweets to her youngest siblings when she thinks no one is watching. He smiled, and this time it was the warm, gentle smile she remembered from 1,000 ordinary moments. I love all of you. Valeth looked at this human and this small, fragile, ordinary man who was none of those things. She thought about what it meant to share her life with someone who could be both a monster and a husband, someone who could make tea in the morning and tear apart warriors with his bare hands, someone who would die for her without hesitation and who would also argue with her about the proper way to prune roses. I think, she said slowly, that I might love you too. Only might. I am still adjusting to the fact that my husband is a weapon of mass destruction. Marcus laughed. It was a good laugh, a human laugh. Fair enough, he said. Take all the time you need. She leaned against his shoulder, and they watched the moons together, somewhere out in the galaxy. The Vorn were cowering in their fortresses and wondering what other secrets humanity had hidden somewhere the other species were looking at. Their human neighbors with new eyes, and wondering if the friendly merchants and teachers and farmers they knew were really what they appeared to be. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the custodians waited, ordinary people living ordinary lives ready to become something else the moment they were needed. Marcus Valeth said, Yes, if you ever lie to me again about something important, I will be very angry. I understand. and I might not forgive you a second time. That seems reasonable." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile, but it was a loving one. "Good. And now tell me about these fireflies from your home world, and you mentioned them once, but you never finished the story." Marcus wrapped his arm around her waist and began to speak about glowing fields and summer nights and a childhood that had ended in blood and fire. But his voice was warm and his smile was real, and the monster beneath his skin stayed sleeping. For now that was enough. That was more than enough. And the Empress of the Solari Dominion held her human husband close and decided that whatever came next, they would face it together. The ordinary and the terrible, the gentle and the fierce, that was what she had married. That was what humanity had given her, and she would not trade it for anything in the galaxy.